Senior Chief, with all due respect, that is the dumbest, most analog piece of boomer logic I have ever heard. The words, sharp and dripping with condescension, echoed in the sterile quiet of the after-action review room. On the floor, scattered like discarded toys, lay the bodies of half a dozen Navy SEALs, or at least, their avatars in this multi-million-dollar simulation. A red light pulsed rhythmically on the main screen, casting a bloody glow on the faces of the living. Mission failure. The words were a brand on their pride. Lieutenant Jake Rivas Calcine stood with his hands on his hips, his massive frame seeming to suck all the oxygen out of the room. He was a specimen. 6'4", carved from granite, with a jawline that could cut glass, and a Dartmouth degree to go with his BUD-AS certification. He was the new breed of SEAL officer, a warrior scholar who trusted algorithms more than instinct. He gestured a thick, powerful hand toward the man sitting calmly at the briefing table. My projection based on drone surveillance, thermal imaging, and enemy movement patterns gave us a 98% probability of success on a direct, dynamic entry. 98%. He paced back and forth, the energy radiating from him a stark contrast to the stillness of the man he was addressing. Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne Calcine didn't flinch. He sat with his hands clasped loosely in front of him, his posture relaxed. He was 52 years old, built like a wiry coyote, not a wolf. His face was a roadmap of sun and hardship, etched with lines that could have been from laughter or immense sorrow. It was impossible to tell. He looked more like a high school history teacher than a man who had spent 30 years in the shadows of the world's most dangerous places. He slowly blinked his gray eyes, the only sign he'd even heard the lieutenant. "And I told you, sir." Doc's voice was quiet, raspy, like stones tumbling in a slow river. "That the pattern was too perfect. It was a trap." "A trap," Rivas scoffed, a harsh, humorless sound. "It was data, Senior Chief, hard data. Not some mystical gut feeling." You hesitated. You called for a 5-second hold at the breach point to read the room. In those 5 seconds, the simulation registered a tripwire-activated explosive. It took out our breacher, our point man, and you. Game over. Your gut got us all killed. The other men in the room, the rest of SEAL Team 3's Echo Platoon, shifted uncomfortably. They were caught in the crossfire of a battle that had been brewing for months, ever since Lieutenant Rivas had taken command. It was the irresistible force versus the immovable object. New school analytics versus old school experience. The officer fresh from his Ivy League triumphs, and the enlisted man who had forgotten more about combat than Rivas would ever know. There was dust on the floor, Lieutenant, Doc said, his voice maddeningly calm. In the schematics, that room was a tiled kitchen. But the thermal showed it was cold, no active refrigerator, no stove. And the drone footage, just for a second, you could see the light from under the door catch the air. It was full of fine particulate, dust. A kitchen in a lived-in compound is never that dusty unless no one has used the door in a long time. They weren't using the door, they were using the window. They were waiting for us at the door. Rivas stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. "Dust? You're talking about dust? I'm showing you predictive modeling, satellite uplinks, biometric tracking, and you're talking about housekeeping." He turned to the rest of the team, his arms spread wide in exasperation. "Do you see what I'm dealing with here? This is what's holding us back. We have the technology to be gods of the battlefield, and we're being held hostage by superstition and campfire stories. This isn't your grandfather's war anymore, Senior Chief. We adapt or we die." Doc Thorne didn't respond. He simply picked up a pen from the table and began methodically disassembling it. Click, spring, in cartridge, casing. His hands, though weathered, were steady and precise. They were the hands of a surgeon, a bomb technician, a man who understood that the smallest components, a spring, a grain of dust, could determine everything. Rivas took that silence as a victory, a concession. He puffed out his chest, his authority reasserted. "All right, debrief's over. Hit the showers. We're running the simulation again at 1900 hours. My way, without the 5-second dust reading pause." The men filed out, their expressions a mix of frustration and resignation. They respected the Senior Chief, revered him, even. But the lieutenant was the one who wrote their evaluations. As the last man left, Master Chief O'Connell, the platoon chief, a grizzled Irishman with a weary soul, lingered by the door. He looked from Rivas's triumphant sneer to Doc's quiet focus on the disassembled pen. "Easy, Boole," O'Connell rumbled, his voice a low warning. "You're gonna poke that bear one too many times." Rivas just laughed. "That's not a bear, Master Chief. That's a dinosaur. And I'm the meteor." He strode out of the room, leaving Doc Thorne alone in the pulsing red glow of the mission failure sign. Doc calmly, methodically, began to reassemble the pen. Click, spring, casing. His face was unreadable, his mind 1,000 miles away. But if you looked closely, very closely, you could see a flicker in his gray eyes, not of anger, not of defeat, but of something far, far colder, the quiet patience of a predator who knows his time to hunt is coming. The conflict wasn't confined to the debriefing room. It bled into every aspect of their workup for deployment. The training cycle was a relentless grind, a crucible designed to forge the platoon into a single, unbreakable weapon. But under Lieutenant Rivas, it was becoming a fractured, disjointed thing. On the firing range, Rivas was a machine. He preached speed, aggression, overwhelming firepower. His drills were all about split times and controlled pairs, emptying magazines into paper targets with brutal efficiency. He'd stand behind the line, stopwatch in hand, barking corrections. "Faster, Miller, don't aim. Point, you're thinking too much." Doc, meanwhile, would be off to the side, practicing slow, deliberate shots from impossible positions. Lying on his back, shooting under a barricade, using his non-dominant hand. He'd take one shot every 30 seconds, his breathing controlled, his focus absolute. Rivas saw it as a waste of time. "Looks great for the movies, Senior Chief," he'd call out, a smirk on his face. But in a real gunfight, you'd be dead 10 times over before you got that first perfect shot off. Doc would just eject the single spent casing, the small brass cylinder glinting in the California sun, and say nothing, but the younger guys watched him. They saw that his one cold, deliberate shot was always perfectly placed, a single, ragged hole in the dead center of the target's cranium. During physical training, Rivas was in his element. He led them on punishing runs through the soft sand of Coronado Beach, his powerful legs churning, his voice roaring cadence. He loved the smoke sessions, the brutal calisthenics that pushed men to their absolute physical and mental limits. He thrived on it, his own performance a constant, unspoken challenge to the rest of the team. He was always first, always the fastest, always the strongest. Doc was never first, he was never the fastest. But he never, ever quit. He ran at his own steady, economical pace, his breathing even, his expression unchanging. He looked like a man out for a light jog, even as younger, stronger men were collapsing in the sand, vomiting from exertion. Rivas saw it as weakness, a lack of competitive fire. "Keeping up, old-timer," he'd shout over his shoulder. "Don't want you to break a hip." The platoon was becoming to separate teams. Rivas's faction, a handful of younger guys impressed by his strength and confidence, who embraced the new tech and the aggressive mindset. And the others, mostly the more seasoned operators, who gravitated toward Doc's quiet wisdom and O'Connell's steady leadership. They saw the danger in Rivas's arrogance, the fatal flaw in his perfect, data-driven world. The breaking point came during a live-fire-kill-house drill. The scenario was a classic: breach a room, neutralize to hostile targets, and secure a high-value asset, represented by a mannequin. Rivas's plan, as always, was about speed and shock and awe. "Flash bang on my count, Miller, your point man. Go in hard and fast, left side, I'll take the right." We overwhelm them before they can even blink. But the kill house was notoriously tricky. The instructors who ran it were masters of psychological warfare, constantly changing the layout, adding unexpected twists. "Lieutenant," Doc said quietly, just before they stacked on the door. "Last run, the primary target was on the left. They know we'll expect that. They might have switched the asset with a hostile." Rivas rolled his eyes, the gesture exaggerated under the green glow of his night vision goggles. "Senior Chief, it's a pattern. They establish a pattern. My analysis of their last 24 drills shows a 72% probability the asset is on the left. We play the odds, don't second-guess the data." "It's not about data, sir," Doc countered, his voice low but insistent. "It's about people. The instructors are people. They know we analyze data. The most logical thing for them to do is the illogical thing. Are you refusing to follow the plan, Senior Chief? Rivas's voice was sharp, a clear challenge to his authority in front of the whole team. Doc was silent for a beat. No, sir. Good. Rivas nodded, satisfied. Stack up, on my mark. The team got into position. The air was thick with tension. Miller, the young SEAL on point, looked nervous. He was barely 23, eager to prove himself to the hard-charging lieutenant. 3-1 execute. The flashbang went off with a deafening crack and a blinding white light. Miller burst through the door, rifle up, swinging left as he'd been ordered. But Doc was right. The instructors had anticipated the aggressive, left-side entry. The mannequin asset was on the left, but it was booby-trapped. The moment Miller's rifle swept past it, a network of embedded simunition rounds paintball-like projectiles that hit with the force of a hammer was set to go off, aimed right at the entry point. In the far right corner, hidden in shadow, was the primary hostile target, ready to engage a team focused on the wrong side of the room. It was a perfect trap, a data-driven assumption leading them straight into an ambush. But in the split second of the breach, Doc Thorne did something that wasn't in any manual. He didn't follow Miller into the room. As Miller went left, Doc took one hard step right into the door frame and shoved the heavy steel door with all his might. He wasn't trying to enter. He was trying to block the line of sight. The sim rounds erupted from the mannequin with a furious clatter, a storm of plastic and paint. Instead of shredding Miller, they slammed harmlessly into the closing door. At the same time, from his protected position in the doorway, Doc raised his rifle and fired two precise shots into the shadowy right corner of the room. Thwack, thwack. The hostile target's light flashed red, neutralized. The entire event took less than 2 seconds. Silence. Miller stood in the middle of the room, untouched but shaking, the spots from the flashbang still dancing in his vision. He stared at the mannequin, now pockmarked with paint splatters, and then at the closing door that had saved him. Rivas came in a second later, his own rifle still pointed at the now neutralized target. He took in the scene, the booby-trapped asset, the pockmarked door, and Doc standing calmly in the threshold, lowering his weapon. The range safety officer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. And exercise, and exercise. Rivas stormed over to Doc, his face livid with rage. He ripped off his helmet, his face slick with sweat. What in the hell was that, Senior Chief? You broke formation. You abandoned your role. You directly disobeyed my briefing. Miller, pale and shaken, spoke up. Sir, he saved my life. That trap would have lit me up. Shut it, Miller, Rivas snapped, not even looking at him. His eyes were locked on Doc. I don't care what you think just happened. What did happen is that my Senior Chief broke protocol, went rogue, and jeopardized the entire entry. You're supposed to be the experienced one, the steady hand. That was chaos. That was freelancing. It was improvisation, Lieutenant, Doc said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. The plan was wrong. I adapted to save our point man. The plan was statistically sound, Rivas roared, jabbing a finger into Doc's chest. Your adaptation could have gotten us all killed. You're a medic, for God's sake. Your job is to follow orders and patch people up, not to play point man and make command decisions. The insult hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Reducing a 30-year SEAL to just his medical specialty was the ultimate sign of disrespect. Doc Thorne's gray eyes, for the first time, turned to ice. He didn't say a word. He just held the lieutenant's furious gaze. And in that silence, Jake Rivas felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt since he was a terrified kid at Buddy S. He felt fear. He didn't know why. The man in front of him was smaller, older, and technically his subordinate. But in that moment, Rivas felt like he had just kicked a hornet's nest the size of a mountain. He had crossed a line, and he knew it, but his pride, his massive, unyielding pride, wouldn't let him back down. That's it, Rivas said, his voice shaking with fury. I'm done. I'm filing a formal complaint. I'm recommending you for review and removal from this platoon. Your time's up, old man. You're a liability. Lieutenant Rivas was true to his word. The next morning, a formal complaint was on the desk of the troop commander, and a review of Senior Chief Thorne's operational fitness was scheduled. Rivas had documented the incident in cold, official language, painting Doc as a reckless, insubordinate operator whose unpredictable actions and refusal to adhere to data-driven strategy made him a danger to the team. The news spread through the platoon like a virus. The team was officially broken. The younger guys, loyal to Rivas, saw it as a necessary step. "Doc's a legend," one of them argued, "but maybe the lieutenant's right. The game has changed." The older guys were furious. "That punk kid is trying to crucify a living legend because his ego got bruised," another veteran operator grumbled to Master Chief O'Connell. O'Connell knew he had to intervene. He found Rivas in the platoon's gear cage, meticulously field stripping his rifle. "We need to talk, Boole," O'Connell said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Rivas didn't look up. "Nothing to talk about, Master Chief. It's a command issue now. I'm just ensuring the safety and effectiveness of my team." "Your team?" O'Connell let out a short, sharp laugh. "You're gonna get your team killed. And then you're gonna write a perfectly formatted report about how the data said it shouldn't have happened." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Pull the complaint, Jake. You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Rivas shot back, finally looking up, his eyes blazing with defiance. "I'm cutting out the cancer of this is how we've always done it. Doc is a relic. He's holding us back." O'Connell sighed, a weary, soul-deep sound. He leaned against a rack of body armor, the weight of the world seeming to press down on his shoulders. "Let me tell you a story, Lieutenant. It's not in any of the official files. You won't find it on any database." He paused, letting the silence hang. "About 15 years ago, during the worst of the fighting in Iraq, a small recon team got compromised deep in enemy territory for men. Their comms were down, their backup was miles away, and an entire company of insurgents was closing in on them. It was a death sentence, no way out." Rivas continued cleaning his rifle, trying to appear uninterested, but O'Connell could see he was listening. "For 3 days, O'Connell continued, his voice barely a whisper, that team evaded a force of over 100 men. They had no food, no water, and were down to their last magazines. On the 3rd night, the insurgents finally cornered them in an old, bombed-out building. It was over. The QRF was still an hour out. The team leader got on the sat phone for one last burst transmission, just to say goodbye to his wife." O'Connell looked Rivas directly in the eye, "But they didn't die. An hour later, when the rescue birds finally got there, they found all 4 men alive. And around them, in a perfect circle, were 34 enemy bodies, not a single American casualty." "What happened?" Rivas asked, his hands finally still. "Nobody knows for sure," O'Connell said. "The official report says the QRF engaged and eliminated the threat. But the guys on the ground, the 4 men who were saved, they tell a different story. They say something came out of the darkness, a ghost. A single operator who had been tracking them, shadowing them without their knowledge. He moved through that building like smoke, using a knife and a suppressed pistol. He dismantled that entire insurgent force, one by one, from the inside out. They said it was like watching a phantom at work. The most terrifying, most brutally efficient display of violence they had ever seen." Rivas was silent, captivated despite himself. "Who was it?" O'Connell stared at him for a long moment. "The insurgents had a name for him, Al-Shaba, the Phantom. He was a legend in the intelligence community. A guy they sent in alone when everything else had gone to hell, but nobody knew his real name. He was a ghost in the system." He pushed himself off the gear rack. "The point is, Lieutenant, there are things that can't be quantified. Things that don't show up in a data plot. You see a medic who's past his prime. I see the man who taught me everything I know about how to stay alive when the math says you're already dead." He started to walk away, then stopped at the door. "Think about that before you end the career of a man you don't even begin to understand. Some dinosaurs are better left undisturbed." O'Connell left. Rivas stood alone in the silence of the gear cage, the story echoing in his mind. For a moment, a sliver of doubt pierced his armor of arrogance. A ghost, the Phantom. It sounded like a tall tale, an old sea story told to scare new officers. He shook his head, clearing the thought. It was just a story, anecdotal evidence, it wasn't data. He picked up his rifle and resumed cleaning it, his movements crisp and certain once more. The complaint would stand. The review would proceed. The final certification exercise was in 3 days. It was a massive, multi-day platoon-level simulation, their final test before deployment. He would design the perfect plan, execute it flawlessly, and prove to everyone at command, the team, and himself that his way was the right way. He would prove that ghosts and phantoms belonged in the past. The air on the morning of the final certification exercise tasted of salt and diesel. Echo Platoon was gathered in the belly of an amphibious transport ship, the rhythmic thrum of the engines a constant, deep vibration in their bones. The mood was grim. The complaint against Doc Thorne had driven a wedge deep into the heart of the team. Doc was there, his face an unreadable mask, but everyone knew he was on borrowed time. This exercise was his last stand, and Lieutenant Rivas's coronation. Rivas stood before a massive monitor displaying a 3D schematic of their objective, a decommissioned oil rig off the coast, now repurposed as a training ground. It was a multi-level maze of steel, rust, and shadows populated by role-players and booby traps. The mission: rescue to high-value hostages, played by intelligence officers from a cell of well-armed terrorists. "All right, listen up," Rivas began, his voice booming with confidence. "Command wants to see how we handle a complex, multifaceted infiltration. They expect us to fail. The data from the last 5 teams to run this scenario shows an average 60% casualty rate. We are not going to be average." He pointed to the screen. "Intel says the hostages are being held in the primary control room on the main deck. The enemy has fortified all direct approaches. They have patrols, snipers, and a comprehensive CCTV system." He smirked. "What they don't know is that we have a back door." He zoomed in on a section of the rig's underwater support structure. "Our intel guys found a flaw in their security net. This maintenance conduit, 10 feet below the waterline. It's not on the original schematics, and it's not monitored. We go in silent, underwater, using closed-circuit rebreathers. We surface inside the rig's lowest level, completely undetected. From there, we work our way up, clearing level by level. We'll be ghosts. They'll never know we're there until it's too late." It was a good plan, a bold plan. It was also incredibly complex, relying on a dozen different pieces of technology working in perfect harmony. Submersible drones for initial recon, encrypted microcomms for silent communication, biometric sensors to track the team's vitals. "Senior Chief," Rivas said, turning to Doc, "you'll be rear security and casualty collection point. We'll be moving fast, and I can't have you slowing down the assault team." It was a final, public humiliation. The team's most experienced operator was being relegated to sitting in the back and waiting for things to go wrong. Doc just nodded slowly. "Understood, sir." Master Chief O'Connell shot Rivas a look that could curdle milk, but said nothing. The battle was already lost. Now, they just had to fight the war. As Rivas continued his detailed, minute-by-minute breakdown of the plan, Doc moved to the back of the briefing room. He wasn't looking at the screens. He was staring at a simple, low-tech weather chart on the wall. It showed barometric pressure, wind direction, and tidal patterns. He traced a line with his finger, his brow furrowed in concentration. O'Connell moved to his side. "What are you seeing, Marcus?" he asked quietly. "A storm's coming in," Doc murmured, his eyes still on the chart. "Not a big one, but it's coming fast. It'll hit the rig in about 3 hours. It's going to stir up the water, Master Chief, a lot." "Will it affect the dive?" "It'll make visibility near zero," Doc said. "And the surge around those support pillars, it'll be like a washing machine. The submersible drones won't be able to hold their position. The conduit entrance will be almost impossible to find." "Did you tell the lieutenant?" Doc finally looked away from the chart, his gray eyes meeting O'Connell's. "What's the point? He has his data. The weather forecast on his tablet probably says partly cloudy. He trusts the satellite more than the sea." He looked back at Rivas, who was now passionately explaining their exfiltration strategy. "He's planned the perfect mission for the perfect day. But the sea, she doesn't care about perfect." O'Connell just shook his head. "God help us." 2 hours later, they were in the water. The black, choppy sea slapped against the sides of their zodiacs. The oil rig loomed out of the darkness like a skeletal iron beast. Rivas's plan began like clockwork. The team slipped over the side, their rebreathers making no sound, no bubbles. They were shadows descending into the deep. But Doc was right. As they neared the rig, the sea began to churn. The predicted storm had arrived early, and with a vengeance. The surge slammed them against the massive steel pillars, disorienting them. Visibility dropped 2 inches. The water was a chaotic, violent soup of sand and debris. Alpha 1, what's the status on the lead drone? Rivas's voice crackled in their earpieces, tinny and distorted by the water pressure. Can't get a lock, Bool. The current's too strong. It's damn it, I've lost the signal. The first piece of the perfect plan had broken. Forget the drone, Rivas ordered, his voice tight. Find the conduit manually, follow the plan. But finding a small, 4-foot opening in the churning blackness, clinging to a massive steel structure, was impossible. For 20 minutes, they struggled, their air supplies dwindling, their bodies being battered. Disorientation was setting in. Panic was starting to creep at the edges. From his position in the rear, Doc watched the vital signs on his monitor. Heart rates were spiking. Oxygen consumption was dangerously high. They were fighting a losing battle. Lieutenant, Doc's calm voice cut through the static. Call it off. Abort the dive. Negative, Senior Chief. Rivas shot back, his breathing ragged. We are not aborting. We find that tunnel. Sir, you're going to lose a man down here, Doc insisted. The sea is going to win this fight. There's another way. What other way? Rivas snapped. This is the only way. The data said so. Forget the data. Doc's voice was hard as iron. Look up. Look at the rig. What do you see? From the violent chaos below, Rivas and his men looked up. Through the murky water, they could see the surface, a roiling sheet of gray and white. And above that, the rig's massive structure. I see a damn oil rig, Rivas growled. What's your point, Doc? You see steel? Doc's voice replied. I see a ladder. The old emergency service ladder on the west face. It's rusted to hell, not on any schematic, and it's 20 feet above the storm surge. They'd never expect to climb in this weather. It's suicide, which is why it's the perfect way in. There was a moment of stunned silence over the comms, a surface climb, in a storm. Up 150 feet of rusted, crumbling steel. It was insane. It was a plan born of desperation, not data. It was the kind of thing old-timers talked about in sea stories. That's a negative, Senior Chief. Rivas's voice was firm, but the ragged edge of panic was still there. The risk is unacceptable. We stick to the primary infiltration plan. Sir, O'Connell's voice cut in, grave and heavy. Miller's O2 is critical. He's not going to make it back to the boat if we stay down here any longer. The primary plan is dead. Doc's right. It's a crazy idea, but it's the only one we've got. The choice was stark. Cling to a failed plan and risk losing a man, or embrace a suicidal alternative. For the first time, Lieutenant Rivas's unshakable confidence was shattered. His perfect algorithm had failed to account for the raw, unpredictable power of the ocean. He was drowning, both literally and figuratively. All right, he finally gasped, the single word a monumental concession. We go with Thorne's plan. Surface now. The team broke for the churning surface, emerging into the horizontal rain and screaming wind of the storm. They fought their way to the west face of the rig, the waves crashing over them, trying to drag them back into the abyss. And there it was, just as Doc had described. A single, rickety ladder, slick with rain and algae, ascending into the darkness. It looked like a spine of some ancient, fossilized creature. I'll take point. Doc's voice came over the comms, and before Rivas could object, he was already moving. He slung his rifle and began to climb. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that defied the chaos around him. His hands and feet found holds that seemed invisible, his body pressed tight against the ladder to minimize the wind's effect. He was not fighting the storm, he was flowing with it. One by one, the rest of the team followed, their multi-million-dollar gear seeming fragile and useless against the primal forces of wind and water. Rivas was last. Every foot of the ascent was a battle. The wind tore at him, trying to peel him from the steel. The cold rain seeped into his bones. Below, the sea raged. This was not a simulation. This was real. This was a world beyond data points and probabilities. It was a world of rust and pain and fear, a world Marcus Thorne called home. When they finally hauled themselves over the railing onto the lowest deck of the rig, they were exhausted, battered, and half-frozen. Their gear was soaked, their sensitive electronics flickering. They were hours behind schedule, and they had entered from a completely unplanned location. Rivas's perfect mission was in tatters. He leaned against a bulkhead, trying to catch his breath, his mind racing to recalculate, to form a new plan. But all his data was useless now. They were blind. "Comms are shot," the team's communication specialist reported, his teeth chattering. "Too much interference from the storm, and all this steel. We're on our own." The team looked to Rivas. They saw a leader lost, his primary weapon, his intellect, his data stripped away from him. He stared into the dark, labyrinthine corridors of the rig, and for the first time, he had no idea what to do. Then, Thorne stepped forward. He had already shed his wet gear, and was checking his weapon, his movements calm and efficient. He looked at the team, then at Rivas. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't gloat. His face was all business. "The storm is our cover," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying with authority over the howl of the wind. "They'll be hunkered down, thinking no one is crazy enough to be out in this. Their sensors will be giving false positives. Their guards will be complacent. We're not blind, Lieutenant. We just have to learn to see differently." He pointed down a dark corridor. "The wind is coming from the west. That means this access tunnel will act as a wind tunnel. They won't post a guard there. It's too exposed. It'll be our way up." He sniffed the air. "I smell diesel fuel. That means a generator room is nearby. Generator rooms are loud. We can use the noise to cover our movement." He wasn't using technology. He was using his senses. He was reading the wind, the sounds, the smells. He was reading the building itself as if it were a living thing. Rivas stared at him, dumbfounded. This was a language he didn't understand. Master Chief O'Connell stepped up and put a hand on Rivas's shoulder. He looked at Doc. "It's your team now. Doc, get us through this." This was it, the ultimate breakdown of the chain of command. An enlisted man taking de facto control from a commissioned officer. It should have been a mutiny. But in that moment, it felt like salvation. Every man on the team, including the ones who had sided with Rivas, knew it was their only chance. Rivas looked at the faces of his men, then at Thorne. He swallowed his pride, the bitterest pill he'd ever taken. He gave a short, sharp nod. "Get us through this, Senior Chief." Doc nodded back, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He turned to the team. "Strip down, go light and fast. Ditch any gear that's not essential. We're not a sledgehammer anymore. We're a scalpel. We move quiet, we stick to the shadows, and we become ghosts." And as Echo Platoon melted into the dark, rusting guts of the oil rig, they were no longer following their lieutenant, they were following the Phantom. What followed was a masterclass in a forgotten art. Lieutenant Rivas, humbled, and now a follower, watched in awe as Thorne moved the team through the oil rig with an almost supernatural instinct. Thorne had become a different person. The quiet, unassuming medic was gone. In his place was a predator of terrifying competence. He didn't use maps or schematics. He moved by reading the flow of the structure. He saw things no one else did. The subtle wear on a floor plate that indicated a hidden patrol route. The direction of a draft that revealed a ventilation shaft they could use to bypass a guarded corridor. The faint echo that told him a large, open room was just around the corner. He communicated not with hand signals from a manual, but with a language of subtle gestures, a glance, a slight tilt of the head, a tap on his weapon that the seasoned operators understood implicitly. It was a fluid, instinctive form of combat, the opposite of Rivas's rigid, by-the-book methods. At one point, they came to a corridor monitored by a CCTV camera. Rivas immediately began calculating the camera's sweep pattern and the blind spots. "We have a 2.7-second window to cross," he whispered. Doc just shook his head. He pointed to a small junction box on the wall. He pulled out a small piece of wire from his kit, stripped the ends with his teeth, and with a surgeon's precision, created a momentary short. The monitor in the security room would flicker for less than a second, a common power surge in a storm. In that flicker, the entire team slipped past, silent as wraiths. It was simple, elegant, and utterly brilliant. It was a solution born not of calculation, but of a deep, intuitive understanding of systems and how to break them. They found the first two-man patrol huddled in a small pump room, trying to stay out of the wind. Rivas prepared to issue an order for a dynamic takedown. But before he could speak, Doc held up a hand. He picked up a loose wrench from the floor. and with a flick of his wrist, tossed it into the dark recesses of the room. It landed with a loud clang. The 2 sentries immediately spun toward the sound, their rifles raised. In that exact moment of distraction, Doc and O'Connell flowed into the room from the opposite side, and the 2 sentries were neutralized without a single sound. Psychological misdirection. Using the enemy's own instincts against them. As they moved upward, clearing level by level, a horrifying realization dawned on Rivas. Doc Thorne wasn't just guessing. He knew how these men would think, how they would react. He was inside their heads. He wasn't fighting the men. He was fighting their human nature. And he was winning. Finally, they reached the main deck. The control room was just ahead, its windows looking out into the raging storm. Thermal imaging, even the short-range gear that was still working, showed to hostiles inside, plus the 2 hostages. "All right," Rivas whispered, falling back into his officer role. "Standard 4-man breach, 2 on the door, 2 on the windows." "No," Doc said, his voice final, "they'll expect that. It's the only way in." He pointed up, toward the ceiling of the control room. "The room is pressurized for fire suppression. There's a maintenance hatch for the halon system right above the main console. It's a 1-man entry, tight squeeze. We can't put 1 man in there alone," Rivas protested. "If he gets into trouble, we can't back him up." Doc looked at him. "I'm not going in, you are." Rivas was stunned into silence. "Me?" "Yes, you, Lieutenant," Doc said, his voice calm. "The enemy knows there's a team of operators here. They're looking for a team. They're not looking for 1 man to drop out of the ceiling. It's the last thing they'll expect. You're the best shot on this team. You have the strength to hold yourself up there, and the speed to act when the time is right. We'll create a diversion at the main door. When they look that way, you drop. You'll have to seconds. Can you do it?" It was more than a question. It was a challenge. And it was a profound act of trust. After everything that had happened, after the insults and the complaint, Doc Thorne was putting the success of the mission and the lives of the hostages in his hands. He was giving him the kill shot. Rivas felt a surge of adrenaline, but it was mixed with a powerful wave of humility. He looked at the confident, unwavering eyes of the senior chief. He finally understood. Doc wasn't trying to undermine him. He was trying to teach him. He was showing him that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about putting the right people in the right place to succeed, even if that person was your rival. Rivas took a deep breath. He checked his suppressed pistol. He looked at Doc and gave a single, determined nod. "I can do it." "Good," Doc said. "Go." While Rivas scaled a nearby gantry to access the roof, Doc and the rest of the team prepared the diversion. It wasn't a flashbang or an explosion. It was something far more subtle. One of the SEALs, an expert in electronics, managed to tap into the rig's internal PA system. Rivas was in position, clinging to a pipe just above the maintenance hatch, his muscles screaming. He could see the 2 terrorists through the grate, casually sitting at the console, the 2 hooded hostages in chairs behind them. Then it happened. A voice, distorted and demonic, suddenly blasted from a speaker inside the control room. It was just a single, guttural word, in Russian, "Spina, behind you." The 2 guards instinctively spun around, their rifles swinging toward the back of the room, their faces etched with confusion and panic. In that 1 second of disorientation, Rivas dropped. He landed in a perfect crouch on the console, a silent shadow descending from above. Before the guards could even process what was happening, he had raised his pistol, thwack, thwack. To perfect shots, the lights on the guards' vests flashed red. Mission complete. Rivas stood there, his heart hammering in his chest, surrounded by the silence of the control room. He had done it, but it wasn't his plan. It wasn't his data. It was his action, guided by the wisdom and trust of the man he had tried to destroy. The exercise was over, but his real education had just begun. The declaration and exercise crackled over the rig's loudspeakers, sounding distant and surreal against the howl of the storm. The 2 hostages pulled off their hoods, smiling. The neutralized terrorists got to their feet, shaking their heads in disbelief. One of them walked over to Rivas. "Never saw you coming, man." Dropping from the ceiling. "Nobody's ever tried that before." The rest of Echo Platoon entered the control room, their faces grim, but etched with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. They had been battered, humbled, and pushed to the brink, but they had succeeded. The formal debriefing took place the next day, back at the base in Coronado. The atmosphere was completely different from the last one. The entire command staff for Naval Special Warfare Group 1 was present, their faces stern and unreadable. The main screen displayed the mission metrics. The lead evaluator, a grizzled command master chief with salt in his veins, stood before the platoon. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice like gravel, "the final certification exercise is designed to be a failure. We push you until you break, just to see what happens next. Lieutenant Rivas, your initial mission plan was, by all accounts, technically brilliant." Rivas braced himself. "It was also a catastrophic failure," the Master Chief continued, his voice flat. "Your reliance on technology that was predictably compromised by the environment led to a simulated mission abort and a potential loss of life. According to the simulation computer, had you continued to follow your initial plan, your platoon would have suffered a 90% casualty rate before even reaching the first deck. A wave of sickness washed over Rivas, 90%. He would have led almost all of his men to their deaths, armed with nothing but his own arrogance and a faulty algorithm." The Master Chief then turned his gaze on Doc Thorne. "Senior Chief Thorne, your decision to override the initial plan and execute a high-risk surface infiltration was unorthodox. It was reckless. It broke about a dozen protocols." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It also saved the entire platoon and led to 100% mission success with 0 casualties. It was one of the finest displays of adaptive, unconventional warfare I have ever seen." The room was silent. Rivas stood up. He didn't wait to be asked. His voice was steady, but stripped of all its former arrogance. "Sirs, the mission succeeded in spite of my leadership, not because of it. I failed this team. I was arrogant, I was inflexible, and I refused to listen to the wisdom and experience of my senior chief. My plan was a recipe for disaster. Senior Chief Thorne's plan was the only reason we are all standing here today. He saved us." He then turned to face Doc Thorne directly, in front of the entire command staff. "Senior Chief, I was wrong. About everything. My complaint against you was unfounded, unprofessional, and born of my own ego. I am formally withdrawing it. And I want to apologize. I disrespected you. And I almost got our men killed because of it. I am sorry. It was a complete and total surrender, a public act of contrition that stunned everyone in the room." Doc Thorne looked at the young lieutenant. He saw the broken pride, but he also saw something new in Rivas's eyes, genuine humility. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Apology accepted. Later that day, the Command Master Chief called Rivas into his office. The office was sparse, decorated only with platoon photos and plaques from forgotten conflicts. "Sit down, Lieutenant," the Master Chief said, gesturing to a chair. He sat behind his desk, but didn't say anything for a long time. He just studied Rivas. "You did a good thing today," he finally said. "It takes a big man to admit he's wrong. Especially in a room full of sharks like that one." "It was the truth, Master Chief," Rivas said quietly. "I know it was." The Master Chief leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Now let me tell you the truth about the man you tried to have fired. You think Marcus Thorne is just a medic." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Son, Doc is just the name he uses now. Back in the day, he had another one." He slid a single, heavily redacted file across the desk. Rivas picked it up. Most of it was blacked out. But one codename was visible, Al-Shaba, the Phantom. Rivas's blood ran cold. O'Connell's story, it wasn't a story. Senior Chief Thorne wasn't just in the teams, the Master Chief said, his voice low and reverent. For a certain period of time, in certain parts of the world, he was the teams. He was the guy they sent in when a platoon wasn't enough. The things he did, the missions he ran, they don't write them down, they whisper about them. He wrote half the damn book on unconventional warfare you studied at OCS, he just never put his name on it. But why is he a medic now? Rivas asked, his mind reeling. Why isn't he running a whole command? The Master Chief's face softened, because about 10 years ago, on a mission that doesn't exist, he lost his point man. A kid, barely 21, Doc blamed himself. Said his plan was too aggressive. He came back, and he was different. He told command he was done kicking down doors. He retrained as a special operations combat medic. Said he wanted to spend the rest of his career putting people back together instead of taking them apart. He wanted to make sure no more kids died on his watch. The weight of it all hit Rivas like a physical blow. The man he had called a dinosaur, a liability, the man he had accused of being reckless, was a legend haunted by a single loss. A man who had chosen a life of healing over a life of killing because of his own profound sense of responsibility. His hesitation at the breach point wasn't a flaw, it was the scar tissue of experience. He stayed on as a senior chief, the Master Chief finished, because he wants to mentor the new generation. To teach you kids the things that aren't in the books, lessons written in blood, lessons you tried to ignore. Rivas left the office a changed man. The world was no longer a neat collection of data points. It was a messy, complex, and profound place filled with ghosts and legends walking in plain sight. He found Doc Thorne on the grinder, the hallowed asphalt square where seals are made and broken, staring out at the ocean. He walked up and stood beside him, not as his commanding officer, but as a student. Master Chief O'Connell told me a story, Rivas said, his voice quiet, about a phantom. Doc didn't look at him, he just kept his eyes on the waves. Old sea stories, he said, the words carried away by the wind. I don't think so, Rivas said. I think it was real. He took a deep breath. Senior Chief Marcus, will you teach me? Teach me what you know, the real stuff, not the stuff in the books. Doc Thorne finally turned his head. He looked at the young lieutenant, at the broken arrogance and the new, raw humility. He saw a leader who had been forged in the crucible of failure and had come out stronger. He saw a man worth teaching. A small, rare smile touched the corners of his mouth. All right, Lieutenant, he said, we'll start tomorrow. First lesson, learn how to listen to the sea. The weeks that followed transformed Echo Platoon. The tension was gone, replaced by a newfound synergy. Lieutenant Rivas became Doc Thorne's shadow, absorbing every lesson with a ferocious hunger. He learned that the most advanced technology was useless without the wisdom to apply it correctly. He learned that true strength wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but the calmest mind. Their training sessions became a fusion of the old and the new. Rivas would design a plan based on his data and analytics, and then he would bring it to Doc. Okay, Senior Chief, he'd say. Here's what the computer says. Now tell me where the ghosts are. Tell me what the data doesn't see. Doc, in turn, would point out the human element. The potential for panic, for complacency, for illogical but predictable human behavior. Together, they forged a new way of fighting, blending cutting-edge technology with timeless, hard-won experience. The team became stronger, faster, and smarter than ever before. They were a single, cohesive unit, a perfect synthesis of the warrior scholar and the old phantom. On the eve of their deployment, the entire platoon gathered for a final beer at a local bar in Coronado. The mood was light, full of the easy camaraderie of men who trust each other with their lives. Rivas raised his glass. To Echo Platoon, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And to the men who make it what it is. He then turned to Doc Thorne, and to Senior Chief Thorne, who taught me that the most important lessons aren't learned in a classroom, but are earned through sacrifice, humility, and a hell of a lot of experience. Doc simply raised his glass and nodded, the quiet professional to the end. But the look of mutual respect that passed between the two men was more powerful than any speech. The brash young lieutenant and the quiet old legend had found common ground. They had made each other better. They were ready for whatever the world was about to throw at them. This story, a modern parable from the hidden world of our nation's most elite warriors, holds some powerful truths that apply to every single one of us, whether we wear a uniform or not. First, it's a stark reminder to never, ever judge a book by its cover. Lieutenant Rivas saw an old man, a dinosaur, and completely dismissed him. He failed to see the living legend standing right in front of him. How often do we do that in our own lives, dismissing someone's quiet wisdom because they don't have a fancy title or ignoring experience in favor of the newest, flashiest trend? True capability, true strength, often lies silent. It doesn't need to announce itself. Second, it teaches us about the nature of real strength. Rivas represented strength as we often see it, loud, physical, confident, and aggressive. But Doc Thorne showed us a different kind of strength. A quiet, patient, and humble strength, rooted not in ego, but in deep, unshakable competence. True strength isn't about overwhelming your opponent. It's about outthinking them, understanding them, and sometimes simply outlasting them. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, this is a story about humility. Lieutenant Rivas's greatest moment of leadership wasn't when he was giving orders. It was when he stood up and admitted he was wrong. His willingness to swallow his pride, to learn from the man he had belittled, is what ultimately saved his team and made him a true leader. It's a powerful lesson. Our ability to learn and grow is directly tied to our ability to be humble. The world is constantly changing, with new technologies and new ideas. But some things are timeless: wisdom, experience, and the quiet dignity of the quiet professional. The best teams, the best businesses, the best families, they're the ones that find a way to honor the past while embracing the future. They blend the new data with the old sea stories. I want to leave you with a question. Who are the Doc Thornes in your life? The quiet, experienced people whose wisdom you might be overlooking. And what's a time when you realize that old school experience was something that no amount of new technology could ever replace? Share your stories and your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience adds value to this entire community. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of quiet strength and hard-won wisdom, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have more stories like this to share, and you won't want to miss them. Thank you for watching. Stay humble and stay strong.